Hello, welcome back to the Fifth Star. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Albert.
And in this podcast, we are trying to find our next 5-star movie that we can agree upon. And when we do, this podcast will fall down a well.
No. So on this episode, we're reviewing The Piano Lesson. It is the directorial debut of Malcolm Washington, Denzel Washington's son. And it is an adaptation of the Pulitzer Prize-winning play by August Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells a story basically of a family and especially the brother and sister who are fighting over this heirloom piano that's been passed down and kind of what to do with it. So we'll get into it. But before we do, we like to guess what we each gave this movie. We both wrote down our scores out of 5 on the other side of this whiteboard. And I'm going to guess that, Jamie, you gave it 3.5 out of 5.
Okay.
What do you think I gave it?
I think you didn't like it.
Okay.
I can't decide if you gave it a 2.5 or a 3. I'm going to say you gave it a 2.5.
Okay.
Just because I think I guessed you gave the last 2 3s.
That's fair. Okay, so we will give our initial thoughts, we'll reveal our scores, and then we'll get into spoilers. So, what did you think of The Piano Lesson?
Okay, so I actually really liked it. At first I wasn't into it. I actually did not realize it was based off a play, but it became very apparent, like the first scene where they're in the house talking, that I was like, oh, this dialogue is a play. 100%. They're doing like all the setup through dialogue. The way that it's set up in a house, I'm like, this would so easily translate to a play. So I looked it up, and it's based off of a play by August Wilson. And I wasn't really into it at the beginning because I felt like the setup was a bit choppy. But then by the end, the themes were woven together so well, I thought, that I really ended up enjoying it by the end. What did you think of it?
Yeah, so I was mixed on it. There were things that I thought were pretty good, but other things that I thought didn't really work as well. And ultimately, it came down to the fact that it is a play, and it felt very much still like a play. And I think this is just something that play adaptations and movies kind of struggle with all the time. Some movies do it better than others. This one, Malcolm Washington definitely made a concerted effort to try to make it as cinematic as he could.
Yeah.
When the movie did do those things, it kind of expanded beyond the living room, and also there's a lot of kind of supernatural elements and some of the flashbacks and how they show those things. I thought those elements worked well.
Yeah.
But there's still just huge chunks of the movie where they're just sitting around in a living room and just characters go into these long monologues.
Yeah.
And those parts just really dragged the movie down for me. Also, it's really slow, the plotting. I mean, we talked about it in the beginning, but it's a brother and sister that are fighting over this heirloom piano.
Yeah.
And you kind of find out ultimately what this piano signifies and how it's tied to their family history.
Right.
But that takes a long time to get to that piano lesson that Samuel L. Jackson
that should have come sooner.
Yeah, that explanation is just that idea is teased throughout the whole first act. But I looked at my watch, when they actually start explaining the backstory finally, and it was like 45 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're just thinking, oh my goodness, can they just get on with the plot? And what's the conflict here?
Yeah.
And without knowing what the conflict was really about. But I do think, obviously, the characters are really well written. The characters do feel like they have a lot of backstory and history. They're all kind of family, and so you have all the interpersonal dynamics, and so I thought those things did work well.
I really felt like, and because it's based off a play, the dialogue really built tension. A lot of the scenes where there was fighting happening, I felt really tense, and their acting was just really on point. I felt like they did a really good job of demonstrating their trauma, so to speak.
So Denzel Washington produced this. His wife, Pauletta Washington, played one of the characters. So yeah, the whole Washington family is very much a part of this. Interesting fact, that piano that has the family kind of in the story, like all etched in.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, a lot of the Washington family was kind of etched into that, and so he kind of used his own family also as part of that production design. But
Fascinating.
yeah, so it very much was a Washington kind of family affair, and it's interesting that Malcolm is the first time directing, but he also wrote the adaptation, co-wrote it, and he's directing his older brother, John David Washington. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. But as I'm watching it, you have John David Washington who's playing Boy Willie, who's kind of the brother, and what he wants to do is he wants to sell this piano. Because it has all these, this history tied in with when or they were owned as slaves, but the former owner has died. He's fallen into a well.
Right.
And now his land is being kind of sold off.
Right.
And this brother wants to buy a piece of that land, right? Because he's thinking, okay, we're coming out of slavery and want to kind of advance and move on and build kind of a future.
And well, one thing he says in particular is like, this is the one thing that our dad left us. So this is the one thing that we have that we can use to actually build a life off of.
Yeah.
And that's like his argument.
Yeah. Whereas his sister, who's played by Danielle Deadwyler, who plays Bernice, she wants to hold on to this piano because there's all this family history, and she's saying how, if I don't want to let go of what was passed down to us and the significance and the value that this has.
And their daddy died getting it for them.
Yeah. And so because of that, that's really at the heart of the conflict. And, I think the acting was good for sure. Danielle Deadwyler, I thought she did well. But I thought with John David Washington, I didn't super love his performance. He was very kind of one note the whole time. He was just kept talking about selling the watermelon so he can make money, and then selling the piano, and he just kind of kept going on and on about that over and over. And I felt like the sister Bernice, like she had more of kind of a different range of emotions, and it was a more dynamic kind of performance. But yeah, John David Washington just kind of sticks to his thing that he's all about, like throughout the whole thing pretty much.
I do agree with you. I feel like he is very one note, but I think his one noteness was ultimately kind of his fatal flaw in that he was constantly deflecting. Deflect. It's not until the end that he allows anything to sink in, That's when I saw the most change happen, but without spoiling.
Yeah. And there's a significant event that happens at the end, and we'll get into spoilers. As he's acting, I just couldn't help but keep thinking he kind of sounds like Denzel Washington.
Oh, interesting.
And his performance is kind of like the way he's delivering some of his monologues kind of sounds like Denzel Washington, but he's not as good as his father is. And there, have you seen Fences?
Not yet.
So I've seen Fences, and I thought this movie reminded me so much of Fences, obviously because that's also another August Wilson adapted play.
And also the Washingtons.
Yeah, but Fences is Denzel Washington and Viola Davis,
right?
Who Viola Davis ended up winning an Oscar for her performance. Like, they're just so good. It felt like it did feel almost like they're kids. Playing that kind of
thing.
And that movie was just much more gripping. I thought the emotional impact was stronger. Their performances were stronger. And this one, it just seemed kind of a much flatter version of that.
Interesting.
I don't know. Like, I thought actually Samuel L. Jackson was very good in this movie. But he just really only has this one monologue where he explains kind of the piano lesson. But other than that, then the rest of the movie doesn't really have much lines. He's just kind of sitting around, like, reacting to things. And then there's a lot of these side kind of tangents with these, love interest stories with this preacher that is kind of in love with Bernice, and she's not exactly reciprocating. But then there's also this other kind of love interest with this friend of the John David character, Wyman, who's kind of
Isn't it Lyman?
Oh, Lyman, sorry, yeah. And yeah, so there's kind of this love triangle thing that's randomly in the middle of this movie that doesn't really seem to
I
have
didn't
anything.
find it random,
Really?
but I'll explain more later in the
Okay.
spoilers. But
yeah, so
I thought everything really pointed to a central theme, and that's what was so cool about it. But my score definitely is because of the writing. I'm giving more acclaim to the play, and more so than the movie.
Yeah, and the play is like a renowned and classic play. And I think that's why I kind of still like it. I like the characters. And I do think the themes are interesting. I felt like the theme that really stood out to me was that the brother and sister kind of represent different philosophies in terms of the way I think maybe the Black American experience might be. So you have Black Americans who've, been in this country for many generations and with this kind of, legacy and lineage that leads back to, slavery, right? And then kind of coming out of, slavery and what that looked like for different families and, migration to the north for some and some staying in the south and, trying to build a life coming out of slavery and what kind of ordeals that
and how
involves,
hard
right?
that is.
Yeah. And so this family in the story is essentially right in the middle of all of that. Like their parents, grandparents were slaves. And then now the kids, they're trying to build a life. But then
there's generational trauma.
Yeah. And then I think so John David Washington his character is kind of the philosophy, it seems, where it's like, okay, let's just move forward. Mm-hmm. Let's not really be hung up on the past and let's advance ourselves and become prosperous. And so he's trying to hustle, make money, right? So he can buy land. Because at the end of the day,
he's attacking.
Yeah. And it's all about moving forward. And there's a part of that that's really admirable in terms of not just laying down and becoming a victim, right?
Right. I think like the way I was telling my husband about it, because we watched it together last night, Bernice is always pushing stuff down and Boy Willie is always pushing stuff sideways.
Yeah.
And that's like the problem is they're both not dealing with it. They're both not addressing the trauma. They're both just trying to cope, essentially. And in the process of their coping, that's like the main crux of their conflict and how they're constantly butting heads.
Yeah.
Because they're both not dealing with it. They're both like, Boy Willie's mad at her because she's not pushing it aside like him and being aggressive about it. And then she's mad at him for not allowing it to still impact him emotionally like it is her. Yeah, I think they're both just really angry with each other for their way that they're both dealing with it.
Yeah. But I think this is why it's so interesting because it's reflected of even conversations that happen even now. Within especially the Black community that I listen to these dialogues and conversations about, what, do we have, how connected do we want to be to like the past history of how we got here, right?
Yeah.
And not we as in me, because I'm obviously not Black, but it's this tension of, do we just forget and just kind of move on now and then just build for the future? Or I think Bernice represents a little more of, well, no, we can't totally let go. Like it's important, roots. Where we came from and not to, to understand the kind of trauma and some of those things, but it's so hard to deal with. You can't really just face it head on either because it's just so, it's challenging, right? And it brings up a lot of other things. And so I think their relationship between the brother and sister do kind of symbolize that very much. And then the piano itself is kind of that also because it has, all this history kind of inscribed on it. And so this piano is symbolic of that. It has value, right? Because they could sell it and make a lot of money off of it. But then in a way does that mean that you're selling out all your history, right? And giving all that up? Or do you just hold on to it and kind of as a kind of memorial to remember? But then maybe that
not actually deal with it.
And then you're kind of haunted by your past, right? And so there's all of those themes, and so
there's so many layers.
So I thought that was really interesting. But that's all in the text, right? That's in the play itself. Now I guess the movie does draw that out and kind of show that, and I think in terms of the haunting element, it definitely kind of highlights that because without getting too much into spoilers, there's a lot of mysticism about people who've died in the past and then how those spirits are still kind of involved in their lives, lingering, and so that is very much drawn out by Malcolm the director, and he kind of visualizes those things and kind of personifies those things.
We will talk more about it in spoilers again, but them literally having to face their demons is very interesting.
So we could go into our scores.
All right.
You guessed that I will give it a 3.5 out of 5.
Or 2.5.
Oh, sorry, 2.5 out of 5, and I give it a 3.0.
Oh, I was torn between those two.
Yeah, I know. You were kind of on the fence. So I'm guessing you maybe went higher than this, but...
Only by a point.
Okay. So you gave it a 4.0
4.0
out of 5. Yeah,
that was kind of small.
We both, I guess, liked it more than we guessed each other would like
it.
But
I just know in the past we've talked about like plays being adapted into movies and you've not been a fan.
Yeah.
So I thought lower might be a safer bet, but
yeah, I do think that's really what kind of hurt it ultimately. It kind of offset some of the things I really liked about it. It was just those really long talky
dialogue.
Yeah, monologues, and it also felt very stagey because it was either on or off kind of thing. When it was very much focused on the monologues and just being in the living room, it just felt like a play. And then when they did other things that were more visual storytelling and kind of flashbacks or the supernatural stuff, then it felt more like a movie. So it was just this constant like hot, cold, on, off for me that...
Well, and it's interesting too because movies are a lot more choppy with scenes. They don't linger in scenes for long. And also in this movie, the scenes were so long that it would transform mid-scene. So the conversation would be about one thing. Whining Boy would be talking about his past, and then the conversation would turn into Lyman's past, and then they'd sing a song, and then it turned into being about the piano. So the scene ended up kind of morphing without cutting to something else.
Yeah.
And movies tend to do that. Movies don't stay in a scene and allow it to transform. You cut to the next scene and it's like a new topic.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because in a
Plays
movie,
don't do that.
Yeah, when it cuts to a new scene, I think for the viewer, it cues you, okay, we're switching gears here.
Yeah.
And it helps you reset your palette a little bit. But then in a play, when it's doing that, you're kind of thinking, where's this going?
But yeah, that's true. But I would also say it's cool because it's more like real life.
Yeah.
Like that's how real life works. We don't just sit in a room and talk about one thing and then move to another room to talk about something else.
That's true.
So I think that was kind of cool to see. But yeah, very obvious that it was a play.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the piano real quick.
Okay.
So to me, what's so interesting is that the piano is a representation, yes, of their heritage, but also it's like a burden. And I thought it was really interesting because early on, even before we know the backstory of the piano, Whining Boy says that his piano playing legacy was such a burden to him. He talks about how he would carry that piano on his back and it would slow him down and he'd watch the rest of the world just like pass him by. And I thought that was such a good way to kind of establish the piano as a character. And something my husband pointed out that I did not notice was how the camera was, every time the piano was moved, the camera was attached
it was
to the
fixed
piano.
Yeah.
So it almost created like a character.
Mm-hmm.
And so the piano itself was sort of alive. And so I think that's a really cool way of showing how this piano is just a metaphor for their trauma, but then also their legacy.
Yeah.
And how we sort of need to carry our legacy with us, but not let it become a burden.
Yeah.
And how do we meet in the middle? And that's sort of what the two main characters are battling the whole time, right? It's like we need to move forward, but we also still need to recognize who we are.
Yeah.
And we can't stop playing the piano.
Yeah. And, that is really kind of something that universally people can identify with, right? Our legacy is important, but we need to also be able to move on and embrace those things and not run away from it. So some of those things are definitely relatable, but in the Black American experience, that's kind of ramped up to another level. It seems
totally
like,
is, yeah.
Because we're talking about slavery, people owning people,
it's
right?
It's a dark legacy.
And so it becomes even harder, I think, in the context of this story, because it's not just as simple as, we had this kind of family feud or whatever, and then we're just needing to move on with it. But there's just so much other stuff. Like people have been burned, in a railroad car, to die for this piano. Like it's just it's a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
And even the very nature of the engravings themselves, like they're beautiful, right? They're ornate, but it also talks about how the mom is almost becomes obsessed with these images and this piano because of like the loss that's happened. Like she's lost her husband over this piano, and then so she wants Bernice to keep playing the piano to kind of conjure up, and kind of remind her and keep her connected to those people. And she's like washing and polishing this piano to the point that she's like spilling blood. And so there's all of that where it's kind of beauty and darkness and pain all mixed in together, and it's really hard to separate those things. I think that is kind of the beautiful thing about this story. It kind of does highlight, and in a very symbolic, tangible way, just how hard and complicated those things are for kind of the Black community a lot of times, and
how it still impacts them today.
Like
slavery was abolished over 100 years ago, but it still impacts Black people today because that generational trauma just is carried over to the next generation and so on. And it's not as simple as like, oh, that's a thing of the past. That's something that is still very much a weight. And so I think this movie did a really good job of kind of demonstrating that. And oh my gosh, the scene at the end when she's playing the piano finally and they're trying to, exorcise their old owner's descendant. You see all of her past ancestors like touching her shoulder. And it's this really cool moment of how her past is both haunting and helpful.
Yeah. And she's actually saying, help me, and calling upon them to kind of help her and give her strength. And then they do that and helps her kind of finally embrace and face those demons. And so overcome them.
Yeah, it's like this, I have to remember them, but also not carry their weight with me every day like she was doing by choosing to let the piano haunt her house.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. And, on the haunting thing, I thought Malcolm Washington did do a good job with kind of the supernatural elements of it. He kind of starts to tease it. You see a little flash of Sutter's ghost and water pooling on the floor.
It was creepy.
And so like some of those things were kind of peppered in until like the third act kind of climax of this big attack that's happening. I don't know, did you like that whole supernatural element of it, the way it was done and how it's cut into the play?
Yeah, it was definitely dramatic, but it was cool because the way Boy Willie addresses it is attack, which is the way he's been going this whole time, right?
Where he's like, also kind of denying it.
I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah, but he initially is in denial. Like he doesn't think
initially in
it's
denial.
Really there.
Again, deflect. Yeah. And then when he's faced with it head on, he's like, I'm gonna go get it because that's the only way I can move forward.
Yeah.
And then Bernice's response is, I can't do this. I can't touch the piano. I can't face it. It's too hard for me. And so it's cool that she's the one really who like gets rid of the ghost, and it's like her choosing to address it in that way, that and they both address it, but it feels more like Bernice's response is the correct one.
I would say so.
Okay.
I think ultimately she's the one that is able to face and overcome those demons. And it does end on a note of it might not be gone forever, but there was a significant kind of victory of overcoming and facing those demons, because at the end, the brother says, you better keep playing that piano. Otherwise, I might come back around and me and Sutter might come around. Does he say Sutter or?
I think he says Sutter.
Yeah. And so is this maybe idea of if you just kind of keep trying to ignore it, like it can come back to haunt you again. So you have to keep dealing with it. Yeah, it does seem like there's a significant freedom that she experiences, because ultimately, Boy Willie, like he just gets kind of attacked and he's not able to fight back. And it's not until,
she
Bernice
banishes
ultimately,
it.
yeah.
And I think Boy Willie's realization happens when he's being, choked by this ghost, that he's like, oh, I can't just attack everything.
Yeah.
I have to address this too. I was in denial this whole time, and Bernice was telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he learns from that, oh, we do have to respect this piano, and like, oh, we do have to recognize our past and keep it with us.
Mm-hmm.
But the healthy parts, that's what's so tricky.
Yeah.
It's like you want to keep the healthy parts of your history, but not carry the trauma with you. You have to kind of like keep healing from it.
Yeah.
And it's a constant cycle process. And yeah, I don't know. I just thought it did a really good job. Oh, I did want to talk about the whole love triangle thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why did it not feel like a totally random tangent? Because it totally felt like that.
So the preacher character is a really important character because the preacher is the one who tells her, you have the power to face this because God is your strength, right?
She's afraid of the piano in a way. She's also resentful about all of the pain that's brought. Yeah, but she can't let it go either.
She can't let it go.
Yeah.
And so he's the voice of truth, kind of telling her, you need to move on. However, what's weird about him is that he kind of has some selfish intentions because he's sort of wanting her to move on so that they can get married.
Yeah.
Which feels a little scuzzy. But he ends up trying to get her to face the piano, face her demon. She refuses. And so his response is, okay, I have to do it. Like, I said I couldn't do it. I said I couldn't banish the demon, but now I have to show her that I can. And so him going home, reading his Bible, coming back, and then trying his hardest
to exercise
the demon and then failing, and then him having to hand it over to her it's very important. It's very important for him to be in the story, I think. As for the other guy, that whole scene Lyman, where when she and Lyman kiss, it's a very like kind of awkward scene. Like you feel like, oh, this is like a little too intimate. I feel like I shouldn't be watching. But when he kisses her and then she kind of looks back at him as she's going up the stairs to go to bed, I felt like she was saying thank you. And I didn't get a ton of like sexual tension. It felt more like relief to me because her whole struggle has been, I can't move on. My husband was killed. He died 3 years ago, but I still can't move on. And her and Lyman kissing is sort of a step that she's taken where she's like, oh,
okay,
I can move on. It felt like Lyman gave her that.
I mean, I could see that because there is an element of them saying, or even Avery, the preacher, saying that, like, who's going to take care of you? Like, you're looking out for your daughter, and because she's a single mom, and looking after your uncles, and she's kind of taken this role of caretaker and put all this burden upon herself.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like she's really looking out for herself or taking care of herself in a way.
She's not, yeah.
Yeah, or being willing to let someone love her, or, that kind of thing. And so maybe when Lyman kind of shows interest and does kind of show her affection, and she allows herself to experience that, it kind of is a reminder to her, like, oh, this is okay. Maybe it's okay for me to be a little selfish in a way, in the way that she would think that is being selfish, but it's like, it's okay for me to be loved also, and for someone to let someone kind of take care of me, right?
Yeah,
I guess it's part it's part of her, I guess, character development. At the end of the day, there's definitely a lot of thematic things that are really interesting here in this movie that are well done, but I think for the viewing experience itself versus like if I was to watch this on a stage, it felt a little bit of a conflict of, okay, there's this kind of family drama, it's very much like a stage, long monologues kind of movie, and then there's this kind of horror, suspense, thriller element to this movie,
right?
And the two are kind of competing throughout the movie, and I kept feeling like when it would go into one, like I liked the more cinematic kind of horror, those themes that he was kind of playing on. It almost had a little bit of a Jordan Peele type,
Yeah.
vibe to it. And so I was liking those things, but then it would just kind of come to a screeching halt when they would start just sitting down and talking. And
It's so funny because I was the opposite.
see, but this is what I'm saying.
I preferred the talking.
Yeah,
scenes.
there were these two different kind of things he was going for and trying to blend it together, but they were.
But I didn't feel a dissonance.
Yeah,
you did though.
I did kind of feel like it was they kind of were going against each other in terms of momentum and the feel and the vibe that you're experiencing. And so ultimately in the end, when it starts to really lean in and it starts to pick up into the whole kind of haunting and all that stuff, I actually liked it. I thought, oh, this is a story that has all these supernatural elements and they're really embracing those things.
Yeah.
And it's very cinematic. And yet all the themes and the things that are trying to be kind of put together in the movie are still there. Like they still land on the viewer. I think that's where I kind of land, where those two sides were in too much conflict that it was hard for me to fully get engaged in certain parts of the movie. But
no, that's fair. One additional thing I wanted to point out that I found interesting was early on when they're talking about the origin story of the piano, Stoker says that their father believed that the piano, them not having it, still showed that the Sutters had ownership over them, right? And that's why he was willing to die to get it back for their family.
Yeah.
And so that was really interesting to me, that the ghost manifested itself as Sutter, because it sort of was implying, even though you have possession of the piano, the Sutters do still have power over you. Especially Bernice.
Yeah.
The Sutters had control over parts of her life because she couldn't
it was
face it.
Yeah, but it was because she was letting them have that kind of power still haunting.
She was kind of letting them have that control. And so her banishing Sutter at the end was like another way of saying, I'm free. Like, I don't need to be afraid of this anymore. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
There were so many tiny little details that you could miss if you're not paying close enough attention.
So I think
I love it when writing does that.
Yeah, I think the original play is like a 5-hour play.
No way.
Yeah. Because
they cut a ton?
I think so, because apparently initially Samuel L. Jackson was really concerned about, are you gonna make this movie like a 5-hour thing because the play is really long. Now there's been a lot of adaptations and different performances, different kind of stagings of this play, so maybe in different ones they take certain cuts on the material, but
That's
anyway,
wild.
let us know what you guys thought if you guys got to see this. And I think even though this was a mixed review for me, I still do think there's interesting elements and themes that are worth exploring and watching.
Yeah. And even though our scores do look completely different, like I do agree with you on most of the movie making points.
Yeah. But especially if you liked Fences and don't mind like a play adaptation, I think you would definitely enjoy it more. You can follow us and
on Letterboxd, YouTube, Spotify. I was gonna say Facebook. We don't have a Facebook.
So next week we're actually gonna skip a week and take a break. But we'll come back 2 weeks from now, and we are gonna do our 2024 movies ranked.
Yes.
So all the movies that we personally have seen throughout this past calendar year, we will rank them in order.
Only the movies that came out this year, though.
Yes. Join us in 2 weeks as we continue our quest for the 5th star.